We'll give it a few extra minutes, everyone, for a couple more entities to jump on.
Okay.
All right, Anna, I think we should go ahead and get started. So I will break the ice. Thank you, everyone, for once again jumping on another conference call, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, all the various meetings that we've had over the last 6 months. I really appreciate everyone jumping on, in particular today, to our hazard mitigation planning meeting. Most of you have worked with our emergency management office over the last couple of years and many years prior, so you know that we do a ton of planning. And one of the most important plans, even outside our county emergency operations plan, is the hazard mitigation plan, where we get the opportunity to identify the hazards that are the most prevalent in our communities, which most of us are aware of, and hopefully down the road put some mitigation actions in to start addressing some of these hazards and trying to do what we can to mitigate them from happening again in the future. Just looking at all the different entities that we have on today, very diverse group from just Portage County entities, private sector, as well as local community. So absolutely fantastic to see everybody taking the time to jump on with us this afternoon. And hopefully, if you weren't able to jump on the 2 o'clock call, we also get some great participation, maybe even from some of our townships to the public in our 5 o'clock call. With that being said, today we consulted out with Burden Planning Solutions, and today your main facilitator will be Anna. Anna, go ahead and wave your hand or say hi if you want to.
Guys.
And with her, she has Brett Morris and Ruki, who will be helping participate and keep track of everything. So without further ado, Anna, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. So like Ryan said, my name is Anna Vanderswag. I am an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. And we'll go ahead and get started. This is our slide just introducing our team. So I am an associate planner with Burton Planning Services. Also on the call, we have Brett Morris, who is also an associate planner. He does a lot of the plan preparation, assisting with public involvement activities, and he does the hazards modeling as well. So he'll do a lot of the determining potential risks in terms of dollar value associated with properties and critical infrastructure and that type of thing for the plan. Also on the call is Rushi, and she is an associate planner, and she's been helping out with the public involvement activities as well. So we are also so thrilled to have so many diverse groups of people on the phone with us today. You help make up the core planning committee, and your role is so significant in this plan. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us on the call. So if you have not done so already, we have several methods that you can sign into the meeting. The first being the SurveyMonkey link. This QR code will take you to that, but my colleagues will also post the link in the chat. You can also email myself or Patty. Our emails are on the screen. You can just let us know your name, your employer, your organization, that kind of thing, in the email. And you can also, if you're calling in by phone, you can text me directly. My number is 614-406-7775, and you can just type your name and who you represent on the call today. So I might have my colleagues follow up for a few of you. If they're noticing that they haven't found that everyone signed in, they might follow you, bug you for that sign in. We just need to document that to FEMA as they review the plan. They'll look for that. So if you have any questions as we're going through, please do not hesitate to ask. We have a large group, but not large enough that I feel like it would be an annoyance if you just unmuted and asked. So just go ahead. If you have any questions while I'm speaking, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself. If you called in on the phone, you can push *6, I believe, and that will unmute, and then feel free to just discuss. The more of this that is a discussion, the better the plan will be as a result, just because we need to have these discussions that lead to a true understanding of what your community needs. So again, feel free to ask questions. You can also type them into the chat. If my colleagues see a recurring theme or something that they think is a good question that should be brought to the whole group, they'll interrupt me and also just have me discuss it here as a group. If you want to follow along with some of the materials that we have, the link to the project website is down on the bottom of this slide. So you can go to www.burtonplanning.com/portage-HMP. And let me see if I want to show you guys exactly what this looks like here. So that way, if you want to download any of the materials from today's meeting, those are all listed here under Meeting 2 materials. So we have the agenda and the presentation, as well as multiple versions of the survey and a frequently asked questions document related to the survey. If you were not at the first meeting, all of those materials from that first meeting are also on the website, including all the surveys we completed and the presentation and some background information. Or if you just need a refresher, if you didn't take those home with you, feel free to just navigate this website and pull up anything that you need. And if you have any questions about any of the materials, or if you need help accessing them, just let one of my colleagues know in the chat and we'll make sure that you get access to these. If you need us to just email it to you directly, if you're having trouble accessing the website, we can do that as well. Just let us know. All right, let me go back to the presentation. So many of you might wonder what the purpose of this meeting is. I don't know how many of you were able to attend our first meeting back in February. But it's been about, it's been 6 months now or so since that first meeting. So a lot of today is going to be an overview of some of that information that we discussed at the first meeting. Our ultimate goal is to update the Portage County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. And I'll also provide you an update on the plan, especially in light of COVID and how that has changed the process just a little bit. I'll give you some results from one of the surveys that you took at the first meeting back in February. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time here gathering your input on some of these projects, some of these mitigation actions that were collected both from you, from the county, from the previous plan. We'll gather your input on those projects, and we'll ask you for some additional projects that you might want to see included in the plan. All right, so I'll jump into the overview of hazard mitigation. Hazard mitigation is a sustained action to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk to human life and property from hazards. And there are 3 goals associated with this process. The first is to reduce potential losses from future disasters. The second is to identify natural hazards and identify actions or projects that can be implemented to reduce loss associated with those hazards. And the third and final goal is to establish a process to implement those actions. So today, the feedback that you will give us will allow us to create a prioritized implementation plan for the county, for jurisdictions, in order to determine which projects need to be prioritized. And so we'll get into that just a little bit down the road. So this slide provides a graphic that describes the disaster response cycle. We have 4 steps outlined in this cycle, the first being mitigation. So mitigation comes into play well before a disaster takes place. This is where this planning process comes into play, where your hazard mitigation plan is significant. The second step is preparedness. This is when a disaster is imminent and when an emergency operations plan comes into play. The response step, the third step, occurs during a disaster. This is when your short-term emergency aid and assistance becomes necessary. And then the fourth step is post-disaster. This is your disaster recovery and disaster recovery plan. So again, we're here with mitigation. We're well before a disaster takes place. We are aiming to prevent worst case scenario. Like Ryan was saying at the beginning, you see some of these sorry, stuck on my word, things like flooding, that you see the same type of patterns repeat itself. So we're aiming to fix those patterns, especially if they have negative consequences associated with them. You know, if you have a flood and you have repetitive flood properties, if you have areas in your streets that continue to flood year after year, how can we prevent that and make sure that we're reducing losses associated with these hazard events, both in terms of human life and property and economic losses. So that's what we're doing today. There are lots of different types of hazards that can be included in a hazard mitigation plan. You have your water-based hazards such as flooding and dam and levee failure, your wind-based hazards such as hurricanes, tornadoes, damaging winds. We don't see too many hurricanes around here, but we do sometimes get remnants of them. And so being prepared for those winds can be important. You have summer and winter storms. You have hazards that are a result of, you know, lack of water, such as drought and wildfires, and also extreme heat plays into that. You have the geology-based hazards, including landslides and earthquakes. Invasive species can be something to consider. All those non-native invasive species can have a real impact on your community, so we can take those into consideration. And then you have your man-made hazards. You have the hazardous materials, terrorism. Terrorism can include cyber terrorism, agro-terrorism, active aggressor. So it's all encompassing of those types of things. This slide outlines the legal basis for hazard mitigation planning. So the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act back in 1988 said that presidential disaster declarations can trigger federal assistance through FEMA. And then in 2000, the Disaster Mitigation Act formed the legal basis for FEMA's state, local, and tribal mitigation planning requirements. So this act in 2000 was what said that jurisdictions must have an adopted plan in order to receive funds from FEMA in the event of a disaster. And this is why your participation today is so critical. Each jurisdiction must participate, both the county level and municipal level. And so if you participate and then adopt the plan, then you'll be able to receive funds from FEMA should a disaster occur. So a little bit more on those requirements. To receive FEMA funding, hazard mitigation plans must be adopted by local jurisdictions, and they must be updated every 5 years. So we saw the last plan was a 2015 plan for Portage County, and we're here 5 years later updating it again. And this is because hazards change over time. The threat level to your county from certain hazards might change over time. So we just want to document that. Included in this hazard mitigation plan will include a public participation documentation of that process. We will include existing conditions and demographics. We'll also include any major disaster declarations that have occurred since the previous plan. Each hazard that was identified by you in the previous meeting, we will do a risk assessment and vulnerability analysis for each hazard. And then each hazard will have associated mitigation actions, and we'll identify their status if they were in the previous plan, and we'll also discuss how to prioritize them. And finally, the plan also needs to include a plan for updating and maintaining the plan over the next 5 years and beyond. So this plan can also create opportunities for funding of projects. Some of these projects include things like property acquisition, demolition, and relocation, property reconstruction, structure elevation, floodproofing, and retrofitting. I don't know why that was so hard to get out. You can also receive funds to purchase generators, funds to make safe rooms, do soil stabilization projects, things like that. You can receive funding for from the federal level. There are lots of benefits to this process. The first being that it minimizes property damage, economic losses, injuries, and loss of human life. The second is that hazard mitigation planning enhances public awareness and education of natural and human-caused hazards. The third, and this is a big part of you being here today, is that it coordinates interjurisdictional preparedness measures and projects and programs for efficient and effective implementation. This process also provides tools for decision makers to better prepare for disasters and allows the county and jurisdictions to achieve state and federal regulatory compliance in order to remain eligible for funding. More specifically, municipalities can receive funds for building and infrastructure needs that are caused by hazards. This includes things like addressing issues, again, caused by hazards, or improving structures to reduce future issues. Police and fire, as well as schools, have the potential to receive funds for safety-related equipment and resources. Businesses, by participating in this process, can reduce or eliminate site and operational impacts caused by hazards. And then the general public can reduce and eliminate monetary and emotional costs associated with lost lives and homes as a result of hazard events. So that was kind of a rundown of hazard mitigation planning, why it's important. Do we have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or just type your question in the chat. We'll be monitoring those. I'm happy to answer any about what I just went over. All right, then we'll jump in to the process and schedule. So this is a list of completed and upcoming tasks associated with this process. So far, we've gathered critical facility information at the county as well as jurisdictional level. We've gathered repetitive lost property information. We've summarized features and demographics of the county and its communities. And we've collected historical information on previous hazard events in the county. We've done GIS base mapping as well as associated HAZAS modeling. We've identified past and potential hazards to evaluate in the plan. And we've identified some mitigation actions from the previous plan that need to be updated. So today, the last item on the list is to identify new mitigation actions. And that's what the purpose of this meeting is today. We will be turning to you to help us prioritize some of these projects and identify more projects that aren't yet on the list. So this is a milestone breakdown of the plan and the planning process. Today, by completing the second meeting, we are completing milestone 4. So we've already done all the risk assessments and vulnerability analyses, and we've developed a draft list of mitigation actions. Going forward from today, we're going to finalize a draft of the plan, and we're going to put that out for both the county and all of you to review. So that way you have the opportunity to give us any final comments that you have on the plan, how it turned out, any final thoughts. So that way we can incorporate those final thoughts into the plan before sending it to the state and federal EMAs for approval. Once they've approved the plan, then each jurisdiction will need to adopt the plan, as well as the county. And then we can close out the project. So this is a visual representation of the project schedule. COVID slightly just pushed us back a few months in terms of hosting this second meeting, but we still have high hopes of having the plan adopted by the end of 2020. So after today, we'll finalize the plan and get that draft out. So we will be turning to you again in September to have you review the draft plan, put that out to the public and the county for reviews. So that way we can get that turned around and sent to FEMA by mid-October, November, and get you a plan that you can adopt by the end of the year. Are there any questions about that schedule? So after today, we won't have any more formal meetings. We might request some follow-up meetings, just one-on-one with specific jurisdictions if we still need some participation. But no big meetings, no more Zoom meetings of this capacity. All right, so let's move on to your role and what we'll be doing today. First, I'll give you an update on some of the previous results from surveys that we've seen. We will then look to you for feedback on proposed mitigation strategies and collect your local knowledge on recurring impacts from hazards. So this chart is a list of all of the hazards that were identified at the first meeting and their raw score. I don't know if all of you completed this survey. If you did not, there is a QR code there at the top that will take you to this survey. And we can also get that link for you and put it in the chat if you don't remember taking this survey. So this was combined, this was a goals, we had a goals survey and then a hazard priority survey associated with it. And each person completing the survey was asked to provide a raw score, rate each hazard on a scale of 0 to 5 based on how much it threatens your community. It's based on your perspective of its threat level to your jurisdiction or the county as a whole. And so if it was rated as a 5, that means that that hazard poses the greatest threat to your community. If it was rated as 0, it meant that you thought you could just have it taken out of the plan, it didn't impact your community at all. So we averaged all of those scores and came up with the raw scores are in the middle, and their associated ratings are on the far right column. So the county, the community rated flooding, utility failure, and tornadoes as the 3 most threatening hazards to your community. And then landslides, earthquakes, and wildfires were deemed the least threatening to your community. So I'll give you just a moment to kind of look over this. I'm curious if there are any surprises, if anything kind of stands out in terms of surprises to you and where things landed. I don't know if anyone wants to speak up. I would also be curious if you look here at numbers 9 and 10, rankings number 9 and 10, you'll see that dam failure and transportation related hazards, those were tied at 2.5, a raw score of 2.5. So I would be curious, maybe from Ryan or anyone else who wants to speak on those, which you think is more severe or threatening to your community. Since those are tied, I'll turn to all of you for feedback on to help me break that tie. What do you think?
I would have to say transportation is the most prevalent. We tend to have transportation incidents which do tie into hazardous materials, so you have overlapping there.
Mm-hmm.
So transportation would go up higher, even though Ohio and even us last year saw dam failures and just dam-related incidents. So we had a potential incident locally which ended up not coming to fruition, thank God. But between Buckeye Lake Dam and then what happened in Trumbull County last year, they are a concern. If you know a little history about dams, and the amount of capital that is available for routine maintenance is non-existent. So they sometimes do the bare minimum to make sure the dam is operational, but the true maintenance needs that some of these dams have, which are already past their life capacity, is concerning a little bit. But they do a lot of additional preparedness in the event a failure happens, but nonetheless, it still probably ranks lower than transportation. Everything else aligns almost exactly how I would accurately feel.
You know,
and then something you see like flooding. Typically, I'll separate flooding for everybody that's on the call. Flooding I'll separate into flash as well as river flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Have a significant flash flooding issue in this county. Utility failures, of course. Summer weather. When I think summer weather, I think microburst as well as macroburst, which happen all the time, which are almost as damaging as tornado occasionally. So. And then active aggressor, while low probability, keep your fingers crossed, hopefully, is a huge concern, I think, for any community. And I know we have a lot of first responders on the call today, so it's good to see that.
I think it's interesting, just in terms of someone who has completed a few of these plans and seen the public's reaction to epidemic as a hazard. You all were right before COVID, before everything shut down from COVID, was this meeting where we asked you to rate these. And so seeing it ranked 8th, I think is probably, long-term where it's averaged out over time. But now when you see plans come up and have people complete the survey, it tends to pop up now towards like 3 or 4. But I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I'm more than happy to talk. Everybody knows here I'm a
talker. Ryan.
Yeah, no, here we go. So actually with epidemic, I think the biggest lesson learned, because we just did some after action review, is there's really a lot of things at the local level that is out of our hands. This was an international and national emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest disruptions like supply chain, there's just absolutely nothing we can do about that to change that. Those are things that are going to have to be done at the federal level to strengthen the preparedness of the entire nation. So I would still rank epidemic that low. I don't want to take away from COVID by any means, but due to probability, frequency, it would still go down there. But it's going to be curious where the country goes moving forward when this is all said and done. The other thing that's on here that's really neat that we're all aware of right now is drought. And I know, James Burlair, you're on the call right now, but maybe we don't focus enough on drought when we've had, I think, 4 years consecutively with USDA emergency declarations for droughts for Portage County. and it hasn't rained anything within the last 3 weeks, which is almost a whole month. So, James, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but maybe we need to look at that a little further or get a better understanding of everything that you guys do with soil and water conservation and our local farm service agencies.
When we enter a drought period, a lot of times we have committees that will set up between FSA, which is Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and ourselves to kind of get a grasp on the severity of the drought and determine the need to possibly search out funds for disaster relief.
Yeah. And being a large agricultural county, I know we put out millions of dollars in agriculture every year. You know, that's something that probably doesn't get looked at closer from my office, and I'll admit that honestly. But something possibly we need to take a closer look at. I know we have a drought section coming up in our actions, so it'll be a nice conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, all that feedback is very helpful. We're taking notes, and we will do our absolute best to integrate that feedback into the plan and make sure that these priorities line up with your feedback. So thank you.
And Anna, just to answer your original question, which I would feel would prioritize dam failure or transportation, I would agree that transportation would rank higher, only because we are so spread out and we have a lot of what we call transportation deserts that do not have transportation services available to them other than like Uber or Lyft or something like that. We have a county bus service called Portage, but they don't go to a lot of the townships and stuff. So I again would agree that transportation would rank higher than dam failure. And if we had dam failure, we'd probably need transportation to, you know, remove some people that may be in one of those transportation deserts.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would add to this, what I don't see is cyber attacks. I'm surprised cyber maybe fell through the cracks a little bit, but I can't imagine it being ranked this low. I mean, we get cyber attacked daily. Lucky enough, our IT office and our firewalls are able to protect us, but a lot of counties around us have not been lucky, in particular Wayne County, Licking County's entire 911 system. So I would think cyber attack has to be up along the lines above hazardous materials, just how it's daily, it's all day long. We just happen to stop it. And all the phishing attacks and everything else.
Yeah, that's
Ryan, we will be covering cyber terrorism in the active aggressor section.
So yeah, and that's something. So active aggressor, this chart doesn't adequately incorporate. So active aggressor is incorporated in a larger terrorism section, and that is the term that should be there instead of active aggressor. So that section will include the cyber terrorism, and you'll see a couple actions, especially related to, you know, with an election coming up, thinking about protection related to cyber attacks in that capacity. Are there any other comments on this? I welcome any additional feedback. Again, if you didn't complete that survey, we can make sure that we get you that survey. All of those links are on the website. So we welcome any additional feedback, or if you just want to take it again to let us know any additional thoughts you have, that works as well. All right. So now we will move on to the one survey that we have for today. This survey is what we call the Mitigation Action Scoring Matrix. And this lists all of the previous actions that were included in the last plan that you all thought you wanted to move into this plan and keep, it was appropriate to keep it going into this plan. And then it also includes some new actions that were included based on your feedback from the previous meeting or based on our research and assessment of each hazard. So we will go through this again. It is on the website, and there's also a link to SurveyMonkey, the QR code, on this screen will take you to the digital version of SurveyMonkey. And I'll also show you the two options we have on the website. So the website, we have a printable version. This you can just print and complete by hand. And then you can either fax it or mail it, scan it in and email it to the county. Another option is doing the fillable survey. This is what I will be using as I walk through it with you. This just allows you to complete it using drop-down menus. You can complete it in Adobe Acrobat and then just simply attach it to an email and send it on to us. And then there's an online survey. I will direct you first to the frequently asked questions, just so that way you know it exists. Let me pull it up here. So this is a list of frequently asked questions that we have for this survey. If you have any additional questions, again, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me at any point in time. That is completely fine. You can also type it in the chat, but I'll show you here. This is our fillable version of the survey. I'm using my second screen here to see what you guys see so I can make sure I have it large enough. Okay, so as part of the hazard mitigation planning process, communities are asked to identify specific projects and activities, and this is what we refer to as mitigation actions that will help communities achieve the long-term outcomes related to the hazards that we just discussed. So the status of each previously identified mitigation action is reviewed during the planning process to determine its progress. And then new mitigation actions and projects are also identified in this process. So the purpose of this mitigation actions scoring matrix is to determine which mitigation actions are relevant to the communities within Portage County, and to determine a corresponding action plan that describes how these actions and projects will be implemented over the next 5 years or so until you do your next plan. So scores will be collected from this matrix and used to decide how these mitigation actions will be prioritized, as well as how they're administered and incorporated into other planning mechanisms throughout the county. So let me show you what it looks like. It's a list of actions, a list of projects, and I corresponded the numbers here so that way we can discuss them, either whether or not you're doing SurveyMonkey or this survey, the physical copy. I will say, if you're teetering, if you're not sure if you want to do the SurveyMonkey version on the online version or this fillable PDF, it'll probably be easier to go along with us if you do the fillable version, but it's completely up to you what you want to do. And sometimes people just prefer to do it by hand. If you want to just print it out and do that way, that's fine too. So we ask you a series of questions related to each project. The first is if you think it's applicable to your jurisdiction, whether or not you're representing the county or a specific township or city or village. We just want to know if you think it's applicable, and you can just indicate yes or no. The second thing, well, then we ask you a series of category-based questions, and we ask you to rate those 1 through 5. So each drop-down gives you 1 through 5. And those definitions of what we're asking you to consider are on the first page. So the first thing we ask you to consider is if that project is cost effective. If the project is very cost effective in terms, so it's very affordable, you would rate it a 5. The more affordable the project, the higher the number. A 1 would be a much more expensive project. If you're unsure or neutral on the category, you can mark it a 3. So if you're sure that it's cheaper on the cheaper side of things, then you can mark it a 5 or a 4. If you think it's more expensive, a 1 or a 2. If you're unsure, you can put it as a 3. The next category is the feasibility. So each project, we ask you to consider if it's feasible, with 5 being the most feasible or easy to complete, and 1 being the least feasible or most difficult to complete. The third category is its impact to the environment. If it has a very small or minimal to no impact on the environment, you would mark it a 5. So that's the most environmentally sound. If it has a very large impact on the environment, then you would mark it a 1, with it being the least environmentally sound. Then we ask you to consider its immediate need. If the project is needed immediately, like it was needed a year or 2 ago, mark it a 5. It's needed ASAP. If it's not something that's needed really maybe at all, or if it's just, something that would be nice to have, you can mark it a 1. And then the final category is risk reduction. How much does this action, if it's completed, reduce risk associated with the hazard that's being called into question? If it reduces the risk significantly, then you would mark it a 5. If it does little to contribute to risk reduction, you'd mark it as a 1. So that's a lot to think about. And so I will just go through and have us do a couple together. So that way we can discuss them. And once you kind of get a sense of the survey, I'll let you kind of roll with it. And then I also would like to come back and discuss any potential projects that you don't see listed that you want to make sure are included. Then we can discuss those and have everyone write them down and complete some scores for those as well.
And Anna, if I can add,
Yeah.
I will note that in the very beginning of this survey, a lot of these are going to be our office specific. So things that you may not have to deal with too often, some of our first responders more than others, but nonetheless, when we think about risk reduction, I think anybody thinks that if we have a house that's in the floodplain and it consistently floods, and we build it above the base flood elevation and or remove it, then we reduce the risk. Now the very first one is NIMS. So how do we reduce risk by National Incident Management System? Well, during COVID-19, we didn't have the best pandemic response plan. We didn't have all the resources, but at the core of what we did is follow the National Incident Management System. So we coordinated a unified command. We opened up our Emergency Operations Center. We followed all our public information per NIMS. We did all our resource management per NIMS. And inadvertently, that reduced the risk because we followed NIMS usually to a T, and we were able to reduce the risk. So that's just another way of looking at it, not necessarily removing a home out of a floodplain, but just with some of these early on actions being EMA heavy, do the best you can. But as soon as you get through some of these early on sections, we'll get into more specific hazards and flooding, active aggressor, et cetera. So bear with us, I guess, in the beginning is the overall theme of what I'm trying to say here. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It definitely, it can seem like a redundant survey. It can seem like something that you just might not know about, but we appreciate all perspectives. And so, you guys taking the time to help us talk through some of these things, it's really significant to the planning process. So we appreciate it.
So,
Matt,
this is Todd here. Our county is pretty diverse, and these questions can be really specific to an individual community, but then you have the broader context of the county, and it may be a big issue in one small location, or it could be an issue across the county. I'm just looking at all these questions. There's 75 questions times 6 is 450. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of questions. And some of the stuff, rooftop. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the questions. I'm just wondering how important they really are. I know you want answers to all of these, and I want to provide them all, but I'm just going to take this is going to take some time to process.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, why starting off together, going through some of these, talking them through, it's going to take some time to do the whole survey, but if we can start off discussing them as a group, then you can kind of say, from your perspective, from your expertise, maybe it's okay that you just say, no, it's not applicable, and defer to either county level experts on that subject, or just kind of decide that you want to take what we've discussed and then process it and spend a little bit more time on the survey. I don't know.
Some of our responses aren't going to be very, you know, some of these things are going to be very specific and are very important, but we may miss it because I'm looking at it from a county-wide perspective. You know, I'm not looking at it from, you know, Manaway Village's perspective or City of Kent's perspective. But anyways, that's just a concern I have about the way the survey's set up.
Sure, and I think to add on to that, Todd, so a lot of this is broad and countywide, and we, just like you, from a planning perspective, always look at everything countywide. But for the incorporated areas, they have to put in a specific plan, so, or a specific action. So while I may have, let's take a look. I may have flooding, reduce repetitive loss structures in Portage County. All right. Well, of the 6 repetitive loss structures, 4 of them are in Aurora East. So Shalersville, working with Shalersville, would put a project in specific to Aurora East. Now, if Shalersville, say, does not participate, which I'm not saying here, but I still have that broad reduced repetitive loss structures, that still makes me eligible for a mitigation project in Aurora East down the road. And then I also see Rootstown Townships on the call with us today. So for example, let's say we want to put a mitigation action in for Muzzy Lake. Well, then we have the opportunity to do that. So once we get to that flooding section, we will also have broad objectives. And then even talking with Burton last week, we're going to nail down and get some of those specific areas that we always have repetitive issues with. So kind of does both, if you will.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. If there are any continuous questions or clarifying things that we can address, just let us know. So we'll just go through this first one as a sample. So the first action here is create a training forum for the new NIMS to limit confusion during disaster response. And so maybe Ryan, you can help us go through this first one if you think it's applicable to the county.
Yeah. So of course, NIMS is mandatory. It's something that we have to do to receive federal grants. It's been around since 2003. So it has changed in 2017, but so yes, cost effective. The trainings are free. The cost is the ability to send your staff to that or backfill your department when you do so. So maybe I would put maybe a 3 or a 4 due to backfill and other things.
Okay.
But technically the class, they're free. The lodging is free. So DHS covers most of the costs associated with training. Technically feasible. I'd have to look at that word again. Yes, so it is feasible. Similar as cost-effective reasons. Environmentally sound, it doesn't really have an issue with environmental, so I would just put a 3 and keep it at neutral. Or do you want to leave it blank, Anna?
So for environmentally sound, if it doesn't impact the environment, I would say 5.
Okay.
So 5, I wouldn't say 5 is like a plus to the environment. I would just say it has no impact. Whereas a 1 would be it has severe negative impact, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Okay.
Immediate need, I would put a 3. Of course, we want everybody to be 100% NIMS trained, but it just takes time to get everybody on board, and then there's turnover. So it's always ongoing. So this is a previous action, and the reason why this one's still here is because it's going to be continuous. And then risk reduction, I believe in it. I think NIMS makes a huge impact to our response. I've seen incidents in our own county where NIMS wasn't worked or used, and it actually caused significant issues with other supporting agencies. So I think it does reduce the risk when we follow NIMS to the best possible. So
Okay.
I should have 4 or 5.
Okay. So this example, I would say if this is something unrelated to what you work with on a day-to-day basis, or if it's something that, I mean, obviously the EMA will have much more of an opinion about these sort of actions at the countywide level. But if you don't work, if that's something that's not familiar to you, I would say if it's not your area of expertise, it's okay to say no, and we'll defer to either the county or other people who it's more their area of expertise. If it's, we're not asking you to necessarily, I mean, if you want to take the time and do the research for all of these, that would be great. But we know it's a long survey, and so we don't necessarily expect that from all of you. So if you, that's kind of all I'll say about that, I guess.
Anna, I think for the first 11, if we can just stem conversation, I would go ahead and allow the EMA office to just identify those ones.
Okay.
And let us do them. But I will challenge the group, specifically some of our townships, villages, and cities that are on the call. Specifically, number 4, it says create, update local emergency action plans. When we get to the municipal or township or village level, you tend to see the emergency operations plan requirement drop off, and that's no reason because of you in particular. It's just you always think federal, state, and county emergency plans, and then occasionally you'll see them at the city level, depending on the size of the city. But I would challenge any local government to have some form of an emergency operations plan or emergency actions plan. And that's something that's been a priority to us, to try to increase preparedness at the local level, because you lead response and you lead recovery. So just kind of think of that one in the back of your mind as you're going through some of this. And I think 1 through 11 we can handle from there on out, Anna. If you want
Okay.
to.
All right. So then we'll pick up back up at 12. I can't see a list of everyone who's on the call. Do we have a representative from Hiram on the call?
I do not know.
So 12, there are only 2 actions that were applicable only to one jurisdiction, and that's indicated here by text. So this one's related to Hiram, and so we'll skip over 12 as well. So 13 says coordinate with the county OHS EMA to determine or develop a standard operating guideline for the city or village during emergencies. So this one is specific to jurisdictions, to cities and villages. If you think it's applicable to your city or village, feel free to let us know on the call or just complete it on your survey.
And I just wanted to mention, because of some other concerns. So if you're a county rep, you would put no on the city village actions. So you wouldn't actually have to fill out the ratings for this one.
Correct. Yeah, so if you are a representative of Hiram, you would fill out all of these numbers for number 12. If you are a representative of the county or any other jurisdiction, you can just skip the numberings here. So I guess I forgot to say that if you say no, it's not applicable, then you just skip all of the numberings and comments. If you feel like putting in a comment as to why you think it's not applicable, then you can do so. But if you say no, there's no need to do the numbers. So I think here, I mean, Ryan, I'll take feedback here. It is a lot to go through each one. Let me just give you some time to go through all of the actions related to multiple hazards. And so multiple hazards, that goes through, let's see, action 22. I'll give you guys a few minutes to read through those and see if you have any specific questions or discussion points. Oh, sorry, that just goes through number 20, through the end of that page. Just to kind of give you a chance to take it all in. And so if you go through that page, just through the multiple hazards, then we'll pick back up with dam failure in just a couple minutes.
Ann, is it okay if I go break the ice?
Yeah, feel free.
So actually, I'm going to look at Todd Peets, if you're willing to provide comments. I know in some of your regional planning and even maybe in the concepts of urban development, is there any of these concepts regarding canopy shading and maybe some more of these progressive planning objectives that you see in 18, 19, and 20?
Those all look like lead requirements or lead opportunities, I should say. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. I just don't see us zoning for those things or working with the townships to zone for those kind of things, unless we find some way to offer density incentives or things like that, which I don't think they're gonna necessarily want incentives for that just yet, because they're not very urbanized. But I don't think they're bad things to ask. I don't think they're bad things at all. I think it's just something that would require education for the community and for elected officials if they want to install that on public buildings.
Is Randy Roberts on the call? Looking down the line, I don't know if I see him or not. Okay, and then maybe Todd, you would know. What about the International Building Code and International Residential Code? Is that something that is promoted to focus on, or is it just Ohio Building Code and that's...
The International Building Code kind of standardizes building, because it's an international code. And usually we follow the state of Ohio Building Code, which incorporates a ton of the International Building Code in it already. So I don't think there's any inconsistencies there, if you will. I just know that the International Building Code is a little different than, like, for example, we had a problem with our subdivisions because the International Building Code requires 2 entrances to a subdivision of more than 30 units. And we don't have that in any of our zoning requirements currently. I know the engineer, I think I saw Mickey on here, and I would concur that we shouldn't require a second entrance for just 30 units, but maybe something more than 30 units. So there's some things that we definitely don't feel is suitable. It's not required. It was put in the appendix of the fire code. That one was. So I'm just saying that the International Building Code is good, very good, but it's not necessarily perfect or fits our community the best in all cases.
So the International Building Code also has subsections based on the hazards. Do you think it would be a better action than to break it down and list them, like adopt it based on flooding requirements, adopt it based on wildfire requirements, for example?
Right. So our building officials are flood coordinator, and so he would definitely know what was best. And if there's the International Building Code, like I said, generally it's very, very, very sound. Don't get me wrong. It's just certain things don't seem to mesh just perfectly with how we are. The one size doesn't fit all kind of thing. But I think Randy Roberts, who's our building official, he would definitely have some good feedback on hazard mitigation, especially in regards to flooding. I'm not against it whatsoever.
So are we allowed to have a conversation regarding maybe even the unnecessary to have these actions in here?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, I'm going to look at the group. A lot of these things are kind of outside my purview. So specifically to some of these objectives here with 16 through 20, and maybe I'll talk to Randy a little further on 16, but do we feel 17 through 20 is necessary for our plan where we are at this moment?
Well, I mean, they do reduce the plants and floodplains. They're talking about that kind of stuff, surface runoff. I mean, all those things are important. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't evaluate them. I just, like I said earlier, maybe one size doesn't fit all in the survey too, and you guys even kind of said you got to gear it towards the community or jurisdiction you're reviewing this for. So I don't think you should take it out. I just think that if it doesn't impact your jurisdiction, maybe you just say, no to that question.
And at that level, when we collate all of the survey responses, if all jurisdictions say no, we can take it out. That's fine.
Yeah, and the mitigation actions will be assigned out to jurisdictions as well. So also on the other side of that, if every jurisdiction except one says no, the action will remain in. It will just be assigned to the one jurisdiction that said, yeah, we want this.
Okay. Well, number 15, just kind of share with the group, preparedness happens at the micro level. So our county is only as strong as some of our business and what we do preparedness, how the individual or the individual and their family prepares for emergencies, and how resilient we are as a entire county. So when I look at number 15, I think it's very important, because if you think about it, for one of our largest employers, Giant Eagle, has a large tornado go through the structure and they don't have a business continuity plan, well, then we just lost, significant amount of economics regarding our county. So, trying to strive for some of those preparedness initiatives at the micro level, like business continuity or even active shooter, then it makes us a lot stronger. So just wanted to kind of share that.
That's a good perspective. Were there any other questions or comments related to the first 20 actions that are applicable to multiple hazards? All right, then let's move on to the specific hazards. Dam failure, there are only 2 actions listed. One is applicable only to Aurora, so we'd be looking to them for an update on that project. But the other one is number 21, says for any identified non-listed impoundments, determine the downstream risk should the facility fail. So I welcome any discussion on that.
So in a roundabout way, I believe that's asking for the inundation maps, see what the downstream risk is. Is that correct?
Brett?
Sorry, I was reading about another mitigation action. Could you repeat the question, please?
So I'm interpreting number 21 as they're basically looking for inundation maps to determine the downstream risk. So how many homes are in the flood zone if the dam fails?
Yeah, this is it's not as detailed as doing an inundation map. You wouldn't have to do that. It'd be a way to accomplish this, sure. Basically, any way that you can determine what the risk is downstream would satisfy this mitigation action.
Okay. I'm okay with that one. That's fine. And we do a lot of this already. So.
Okay.
And then is the city of Aurora on the call? Anybody from the city of Aurora? Okay, I'll just have to do some outreach after this, Hannah.
Yep, no problem. All right, so drought and extreme heat. There are 4 actions here. They're all new. So the first one is encourage or mandate the use of local plants on public property. I guess in general, I'll give you a couple minutes. You can look over them and just let us know any questions or comments about these. I know you've mentioned drought has been something that over the last 4 years you've had declarations related to drought in the county. And so how can we, if there's something else that's not listed here, that would be a better way to tackle either preparing the population for drought or actions that the population can take in case of drought. We're open to other ideas as well.
Right, and I think these are short enough. I'll just show out some comments. But I would look at Commissioner Christian Bennett, maybe even something like this, or if there's a township official or village or city elected official. It says encourage the mandated using of local plants on public property or extrascaping. I mean, obviously you think Arizona, you're looking at stones and rocks versus grass. It could be more cost effective than having to do landscaping for county buildings to do extrascaping. But could you ever see someone mandating such an activity? Would that be something we should look at entertaining, Sabrina?
I'm not quite sure how I would feel about that. I mean, I guess I'd have to think about it or understand it a little bit better. As far as when you say like landscaping and stuff with drought, are you saying like instead of allowing, let's say like, mulch, like to change it to like stone or something like that, that would not prevent, that would prevent like the hazard of fires or?
Well,
I think a little bit of the fire realm too. That's a good point, but
Yeah.
maybe even the lack of use of water.
Yeah.
So I believe this objective is looking at using as limited amount of water as possible, which even though we're in a drought, typically Northeast Ohio doesn't have a water issue.
No.
So kind of the moral story is actually, I would be comfortable with removing this one.
It's number 23.
Unless there's any other comments, even though we have drought, we have dry times like we are in right now, Northeast Ohio's pretty well off regarding water, unless anybody.
Yeah. It's not like we're California out west where they have, restrictions. They can't water their lawns or anything. We don't tend to have that here.
Do you see, I guess one way that we tend to see drought impacts on Ohio is reduced crop yields. Is that a concern at the county level?
I guess I would look to James on that question, if that's a county level concern or.
Yeah, Ryan, and like I said earlier, we work with the USDA departments, and we have what's called a fact committee that we sit together and discuss the issues and determine what the yield losses are, to develop working with USDA to develop any kind of disaster relief program that would go along with that for agriculture.
Yeah, because we had that.
program.
Yeah,
And-
we had that, James, not too long ago. I mean,
Right.
unlike last year, we got a ton of water. A couple of years ago.
Well,
we had
and
a
it goes both ways. Here in Northeast Ohio, last year we had some disaster relief because of excess water.
Yeah.
Where fields could not get planted, there were special programs that were implemented for Northeast Ohio, well, Ohio in general, because of lack of being able to plant. And so that goes both ways for us. And in those programs, we also look at, livestock watering, where in the disaster relief, we may implement programs to develop areas for additional livestock watering for excessive drought. So that's what we look at.
So would you say, James, that number 24 you actually already do? It sounds like you do. You have those triggers.
Yes.
So are we comfortable removing that since that's already ongoing?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think it would be good.
is it something that the individual jurisdictions are also doing, or is this just a countywide thing?
Go ahead, James.
For us, it's countywide or regional. A lot of times we'll combine with Summit County and Trumbull County when we have those committees. So we're discussing more of a regional type area for those disaster programs.
And just to be clear, based on how funding works for these, it doesn't matter if you're already doing them or not, because you can also still get assistance from FEMA for doing things you're already doing, as long as you're in this plan. So funding is something that you're curious about with this. You can still rate it even though you're already doing it, and then get some assistance for that.
So James, would we remove also number 5 then? Because it sort of goes with, I'm assuming 4. I'm assuming you would.
2 was cut off. You mean 25? And
Yeah,
my fault.
yes, yeah. Hey, that's okay. No, I'm just asking, would we then eliminate number 25? Because I would think that if we're already doing the above, we would also be analyzing, the history of the water and the climate and the drought history, or not necessarily.
I would actually look at 25 a little differently.
Okay.
Last year was a good example of just the amount of rain that is in every single storm event that we have. It's not just an afternoon shower anymore. It seems like a 100-year flood event every single time it rains.
Torrential downpour, yeah.
And I know Rootstown's on the call, and they experienced it last year, but I would hang on to this one. It would be nice to do some research to try to justify maybe we are seeing a little bit of a climate change here in Northeast Ohio and just the amount of storms we're having.
Yeah, because
just from observation, I feel like it is happening. It would be nice to justify my opinion on that, whether I'm wrong or right. So.
Because we had several of those, what they call microbursts. And I mean, in 20 minutes, it dumped so much water, it flooded tons of things.
And then number 26, I guess, again, I think that's something we could keep. Sure, if we're looking at new construction, we could look at ways as conservation water.
Efficiency, yeah.
And conservation of water. So I would leave that one. I think that's okay to keep on in there.
All right. Would you like a minute or two to go through the ratings for those? Just give you guys some time to do that, or do you want to move on?
I would say move on for.
Okay. And then earthquakes, there's just one new action. I know that this is not a very, severe hazard for your community, but so the one action is maintain a database to track community vulnerability to earthquake risk and provide documentation. So this is kind of just a tracking trends type of thing, rather than doing much actual, I don't know.
Right. I think similar to 25, I think we'll just keep it. I think it'd be good to know. I think we all assume that our earthquake risk is low. I know there's fault lines here, so maybe my assumptions are wrong. So I rather base it on fact, in my opinion, than just throwing it out there. So I would keep it just for our sake.
Okay.
And we'll look into it a little further.
Yeah, Ryan, you know what? I would agree with that because just because we don't have them a lot, we have had them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, within the last 10 years, we've had a couple. I remember the one in Ravenna that happened and shook the buildings.
And on top, we're not like California where we don't do mitigation measures to limit the impact. So if we did have a little larger one,
yeah,
you could provide a lot more damage than versus you'd see in California from the same side. So due to all the building codes and everything that they do for earthquakes. So I think, yeah, with you, Sabrina, I think we should keep that one.
All right. So we have one action related to epidemic. This is to update a plan with the public health department to better prepare for an epidemic or pandemic. And I know Ryan has said that this there's a plan that already exists for this, but it could use some updating potentially after or even during all of these events with COVID. Do we have any public health officials on the line?
I don't know if I've seen any or not.
Any other?
They're doing a drive-through test site today, so
Oh yeah.
a lot of them are out in Rootstown as we speak. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we do have a pandemic response plan for the county, and I'm sure it's going to need a little TLC and some of the things that we found in our after action review that we've already done for moving in the fall, and I'm confident we'll revisit some of those plans to find areas of improvement. So that's already actually occurring, but yeah, we'll keep it in there.
Okay. All right, and now we'll move on to flooding. So again, flooding was the hazard that was deemed the most, the number one threat to the community based on that survey from the first set of meetings. Let's see. So there are quite a few actions related to flooding. We'll just go ahead and start with the first one and kind of go through them, and if you have any comments, let us know. So number 29 here is enhance wetland buffer requirements to help protect water quality.
James and Mickey, is there anything that we do right now regarding wetlands that would need to keep this one on here, or things that we're doing well already where this one may not be necessary? James, I don't know if you're talking because you're still on mute, but if you have no comment, that's fine too. Sorry, it's the lovely Zoom world.
No, I was just going to say that we don't really do anything with wetlands, and there are no programs or anything that we're actively engaged in. James may be doing something, but my department or stormwater isn't really, except for obviously we're taking care of some water quality features and retention ponds, but I don't know that that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, we have a ton of wetlands in Portage County, and I don't see anything. We don't develop in them. We don't develop near them, from just my perspective. And obviously, I'm not in that realm too often. But let's hang on to this one. I may even talk to Randy about it, and James offline, if that's all right.
Okay.
All right. So the next few were marked as ongoing from the previous plan. So the first is, related to repetitive loss and just keeping up with identifying any repetitive loss properties. I think that at least from a mitigation perspective, that's a pretty important action to keep in, and is likely just at the county level. And then the second one is determine specific cause of flooding for each repetitive loss structure. So those kind of go hand in hand. And then the next one also goes with that. Determine the most appropriate non-invasive corrective action for each repetitive loss structure.
Right. I mean, 30 through 34 have to be in here. There's
Yep.
no way to remove them, because that's what puts the teeth in doing the project. So I know we've had some outreach this year about potentially some homes and businesses being turned into green space because they're just in a floodplain or repetitive flood where it's impossible to sell them to another business or location. So without 30 through 34 in the plan, then those projects won't even be able to occur. So.
All right, and then the next few are related to ditches, 36 through 38. So determining if port ditch and storm waterway maintenance is responsible for flooding in certain areas, identify funding for cleaning and maintaining ditches and storm waterways, and clean and maintain ditches according to the determined cause.
I guess, Mickey, I would look at you for those ones. Are those ones okay to be in here? And with our stormwater committee, how's that process going? Is there anything we could add to it or take away?
I guess I would ask a question regarding stormwater ditches and water. Are we talking about, is this intended to be private property? Is this intended to be public property within the right of way, or what, or which? What are we talking about?
It could be both for the purpose of a project. If it's on private property, we can do a project on private property, it just has to be hosted by a government entity. And then, of course, if it's in the right of way, then we have the responsibility for it. But so it could be both. It could be interpreted as both, Nick.
Okay, well, in the public right of ways, I can't imagine that we have any issues with that. I mean, if we did, that would be forefront and people would be acting on it. I mean, we have resources to take care of those issues now. So I don't know that that's a problem. We do have problems on private property, and most of them are not accessible or fixable within our present scopes.
So maybe we change the language to private property?
Yeah.
Because I would agree with that, absolutely, that most of our issues are on private property. So, Anna, is that an okay correction?
I'll actually defer to Brett for feedback on that.
That's an acceptable. Yeah, it's a good correction. I'm only curious. would still be a county level responsibility if that private property falls into a jurisdiction or a village.
Rephrase that again, Brett.
So if the private property is in a village, would it be the village's responsibility to then complete this action, or would they come to you and ask you to complete that action?
It would be whoever, yes. So if it's in Manaway Village, for example, then they are the local government entity. Doesn't mean that Portage County is the over-encompassing government entity, couldn't host the project.
Okay.
But yes, we would look at the village. For example, we're doing a stormwater project in Manaway Township, and Manaway Township hosted the project.
Okay.
So, yeah. But it would still identify as private property being the main issue, which is what I would concur with.
Yep.
All right. Well, I know we have this meeting marked to go to 3:30 on the calendar. We're able to hang out, at least the Burton planning team is able to hang out longer. But I noticed here with 40, this is a general action related to raising roadway profiles above flood elevation. And we have a spot all the way at the end of the survey. If you scroll down to page 10, or it's the last couple actions if you're on the online digital version, where you can put in specific projects. And if you're aware of like specific locations of some of these projects that need to occur, we encourage you to fill these in with those projects, those specific projects that you'd like to see done. So I wanted to make sure that you all saw that and were aware of that before 3:30 came, in case you have to hop off. So again, related to any of the flooding projects or any of these hazards, if you see or if you don't see a project that you know that you'd like to have completed over the next 5 years related to any of these hazards or multiple hazards, please add them here to the end and rate them so we can make sure that it's included in the plan.
Yeah, and Ryan, I know you mentioned earlier you have some specific projects you wanted to talk about. This would be where we would do that.
Okay. So I'll look at some specific communities and areas across the county and add there. The conversation I think I want to have kind of with the group, and it ties into stormwater. I guess because I don't know, to be honest with you, I just don't know. So regarding stormwater, is there opportunities to go above and beyond industry standard for piping and culverts to combat some of these rain events that we're having, especially as we start getting more developments, developing specifically, you think about brimfields and more concrete put down. There is a concern on our realm for increased flash flooding. So, I don't know what industry standard is, whether it's 5-year piping, 10-year piping, and XYZ culverts, but is that a local zoning issue or building code issue, or is there something we should look at entertaining? I guess I'm going to look at maybe even you, Mickey, to provide some feedback on that one if possible, because we are just getting these significant rain events that are just our stormwater capacity does not seem to be high enough. No fault to anybody, it's just the rain is changing.
Well, there's two issues that I think need to be talked about if you're going to discuss this. The first one is that most of the relatively new subdivisions that have been constructed with stormwater retention facilities. I do not believe that you're going to have the problems you're talking about in those facilities. You're going to have the problems that you're talking about in the facilities that were built circa mid-1970s and earlier, where we have no stormwater retention of any kind. And consequently, when the surrounding areas get built and the transition occurs from what would be considered pervious materials to impervious materials, you end up with problems that those areas cannot take because they were not sized to receive those facilities. So that's a bigger problem. I'm not sure if I know what to say or do about it, but we're not adding to the problem on the one hand, but on the other hand, I guess we are, because as we convert more, as we create more impervious surfaces, we create more water. So I guess we do. But it isn't, at least in the subdivisions that we're building, those are being taken care of or accounted for, if you will. So I'm not sure what to say about that beyond what I've offered.
Right, and what you offered is good to know. I mean, that helped just kind of hone it in a little bit. So, Portage County is developing pretty rapidly. So, west to east. So it's just obviously, as you know, we have a lot of flash flooding in the county in multiple communities. And with these rain events, whether my opinion is accurate or not, and what you have observed, over your career here in Portage County, but the rain events are definitely pretty severe. So I don't know if you've seen that same observation, and primarily just last year was just unbelievable. But just making sure, and I think, if we potentially looking at a project, and I know, there's always Aurora East, there's Manaway, we talked about Gary Road in Burnfield Township today. There's other locations that are these developments that all look very similar, and they all flood the exact same. So maybe we just evaluate some of those areas that were, previous 1970, and say, what can we do? And we've tried before, and that's okay. But no, maybe the new construction was the concern. So, and you helped alleviate that.
Do you maintain a list of the subdivisions or areas that are regularly flooding or flash flooding?
I don't have a list per se. They're in my mind. I know where they are.
Yeah.
Most of them are repetitive loss structures, so they're on a list per se. But
They also cross political jurisdiction boundaries, so they're in their responsibility of different areas and jurisdictions, and it's the kind of thing that isn't tracked very well, probably. Only somebody like Ryan, because Ryan has been involved in the emergency response to those flooding events, and so he's aware of it.
I'm just curious, you mentioned like mid 1970s as sort of a sort of loose cutoff. Would it be helpful to see a map of development that has occurred 1975-ish or before? Kind of compare that with flooding. Would that be helpful for you?
Is that GIS data available? I mean,
Construction date might be available.
I'm not sure how you would compile such a document.
Yeah.
And would it be helpful? It's gonna tell us exactly what Ryan already knows. I mean, we all know where these spots are where we have these issues, because and you know what? There's not that terribly many of them. That's something that should be said. I mean, you're probably talking somewhere between a half a dozen and a dozen, Ryan.
That's probably more than what I was even thinking about.
Yeah, probably
Maybe
closer
3
to
or
a half a
4
dozen trouble spots.
Yeah. So I think just looking at some of the flooding, which was the biggest concern when you think about mitigation planning. I think 42, you said proposed enhanced stormwater infrastructure above industry standards. I mean, that could tie into future mitigation projects. So I think they're okay to keep in here. I think it addresses my concern. I think it helps, understand what Mickey was saying. So I think we're okay there.
Okay. All right. Well, it is 3:30, so I want to acknowledge that at this point is where our calendar invite said that the meeting would end. So if people have to leave, that's fine. I will plan to stay on the call, and I'm happy to keep going through this if other people want to, if you have the time.
I'll hang on with you. if we're going to hang on, I guess anybody that wants to leave can. I do see some members from different communities. I'm going to start with, I think I see Melanie Baker from Kent. Melanie, is there a specific project to the city of Kent that we could discuss while we have you on the phone?
No, not at this time. We were just kind of going over the list. So I'm not alone. We actually came together, and I have Chief Tosco, our new chief, Shearer, and Joan was here with us, but she had to go because she had a meeting at 3:30. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to gather up next week, finish this, and get this out to you then. If there's anything specific, I'll put it at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I see, not to call you out on call, but you're used to it by now if you work with me. But Chief Barnes from Aurora, I know we have flooding along Aurora Lake and potentially multi-jurisdictional flooding between you and Reminderville. I don't know if anybody else is on from Aurora, but are you willing to provide any feedback potentially regarding some of your projects on the previous plan as well as moving forward?
Yeah, I'm going to send a survey over to the service department, the engineers, and let them fill it out.
Roger that, sir.
Let the professionals do their job.
Well, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
See, Chief Kozak from Ravenna Township, I know we had issues there on Brady Lake Road last year. We had a couple microbursts, as well as maybe even multiple rated communications and other things that you may be concerned with, even in the NIMS realm. Anything you want to add from the township level? If you're still on mute, sir. The lovely world of Zoom. Okay. We had some watersheds participate. If there's a nonprofit organization on the call, would you be willing to provide some feedback? Please unmute your phone.
Yes, I plan to share this with my organization. This is Laura from Sugar and River Watershed Partners. So we'll take a look at this. Aurora and Manaway Township are our member communities. So with them in mind, we'll take a look at this and complete the portions of the survey that are applicable to our mission and try and submit that soon.
All right, perfect, Laura. Thank you. And I know we were chatting a little bit in the chat box, and I just want to reiterate, we are working with the watershed, specifically Manaway Township, to address some flooding concerns along Manaway Center Road. So feel free to be as specific or elaborative as you want to.
Yeah, we are also working with them on that FEMA plan, I believe, as well. So we'll be involved in that implementation meeting next week.
Right, and that's a good example for everybody on the call, just for educational wise. Having those language of advanced assistance in this project inadvertently turned into $110,000 for the Manaway Township and Blackbrook watershed. So just one little project in here turned into those efforts, which hopefully will identify what mitigation action we can do in the future to address the flooding concerns. Todd from Regional Planning, you're very important to this process through all your planning endeavors. Anything additional you want to share? All right. Chief Raznick, Suffield, obviously a Wingfoot Lake and other potential flooding areas. Anything specific to you, sir, that you would like to add to this plan? No? Okay. Thank you. And I guess, Mickey, you're the last one. Anything additional from the engineer's office? Obviously, you're extremely important to this process.
Nothing additional that hasn't already been brought up or discussed or offered on.
Do we have, due to our topography, any issues with road slips, things occasionally happening?
We have had a couple of those that we have stabilized over the last, I don't know, eight years or so. We don't really have anything that I'm aware of at this point.
Okay. Any
But we
other
did
roads
have-
or?
We
Sorry,
did
go
have
ahead.
some out by, surprisingly, out by West Branch. Everything was within a short distance of West Branch. But we have spent monies and stabilized those situations.
Any other additional roads? I know you typically think of 303, which is a state route, but Coit Road had some issues. Any other locations that could potentially be included? Bridges or roads that wash out occasionally during heavy rain?
Well, the only spot that we always encounter is Ravenna Road at the reservoir, over by the Akron water supply. That's automatic, and there just isn't anything can be done with the railroad bridge that is overhead, and I can't raise, I can't lower, I can't, so when it floods, and it's usually closed for a couple of days. And that's the way it is.
Roger that. One of the things that was unique was Atwater Township and the mines. I wasn't aware of the
Oh yeah.
mine issue, and that's something that could be incorporated here. Do you have any history on that, Mickey, that you're willing to share?
I'm just aware of a couple of them that were on private property. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure that I know where they're at now. But I am aware of their existence. That's really all I can offer, Ryan.
I know in Muskegon County, they had to remove homes because their homes were slipping into the earth. So kind of unique situation. I don't know if we'd ever run into that, but potentially, you never know. Something you never think of.
Ryan, we do have, this is James from the Conservation Office. We do have some shaft mines in Palmyra, Deerfield area, and we've worked in the past with Natural Resource Conservation Service to measure the depth of some of those, and we've filled one or two of them, and we've worked with the state. The state has a program. Typically what they'll do is fence off the opening or the shaft where the cover's rotted away, and they'll fence around that for safety. So we have found those on private property from time to time. They do exist. So.
Well, growing up in Palmyra Township, I don't know how I didn't find those.
You don't want to.
Yeah.
The one I measured it was 87 feet deep.
Whoa.
Well, thank you for sharing, sir.
You're
Anything
welcome.
else from the agriculture side that we can?
No, not right now. I'll go through the questionnaire and get it all filled out and look at the flooding and the wetland issues also, riparian buffers, and it's all in there. So I'll go through it.
Sounds good.
So I just wanted to ask one quick follow-up question. Sorry if I missed it, but on those mines that you said you found, are those mapped with ODNR already?
No, and not that I'm aware of. They show up from time to time. There is, though, an old map on the wall so I'm told, at the antique store in Rootstown. It's from the mid 1800s. That shows the location of some of those shafts and mines. So maybe the county could put maybe we could put some money in here to go purchase that.
So actually, it's actually funny because ODNR is actually requesting old maps like that so that they can find a lot of these missing mines.
Right.
On their mine locator website. So that getting that map might actually be a really good idea.
Is that in the large antique store right off 76?
Yes, that's what I'm told. Yes.
All right. I'll task Patty with grabbing that on the way home.
She might need a pocket full of money. I heard it's not cheap.
Well, I'll take a picture on my phone and then call it a day. No, it's free.
Perfect.
Nobody else heard that. Looking who else is still on the call with us. All right, look at my staff. Brett, anything to add? You're still muted, sir. There you go. Nope, I think we covered everything. Thank you, sir. And Patty, anything to add from your perspective?
Not at this time, no.
Everything's good here.
All right, well, I think that's it for now.
Great. I will echo one more time, I'm a broken record on this. If you have not signed in yet using one of the methods, I'll put that up on the screen again, just so that way we can make sure that we get everyone signed in. It's just important follow-up in terms of documentation to FEMA. Again, we will also be putting out the draft plan in September for your review. So we'll look to you at that point for some more comments on that. But we do appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. All your feedback has been super helpful. And spread the word. If you have colleagues that you'd like to, if you think that they could provide some good feedback on the plan, it would be great if you would pass it along to them.
Well, thanks everyone. We're gonna go ahead and jump off this call and move into our second Zoom. So, is that it, Anna?
Yep, that's it. Have a good day.
Oh, Ryan,
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Ryan, before I let you go, sorry, we have about an hour if